So the title of today's speech is Continuity and Change in Turkish-Armenian Relations. To offer an evaluation of the current Turkish-Armenian diplomatic relations, I will take a critical approach and consider not only the existing Armenian reality and facts, existing facts that speak for themselves, such as the Armenian state, the country, and also the Armenian diaspora. Other than those facts, I will also consider facts that speak through and for prevailing discourses of history and politics in Armenian life. I've noticed that many studies in the Armenian-Turkish relations often ignore some important dynamics in the politics of these relations, like alienation from homeland and the diasporan setting or milieu in the Armenian case, and then also state development and security issues for the country. So I have serious concerns about the Turkish-Armenian relations that I have considered, and I will bring them up here for diagnostic purposes and for a better understanding of the long-term prospects of Armenian-Turkish relations. So I have the following observations to provide, and I'll give some highlights on those concerns that I have, and offer a critical and broader perspective on policy developments in the region. One concern I have is Turkish-Armenian relations. That's an observation that I have, and I think it's very important to keep that in mind, information. Turkish-Armenian relations should never be understood or confined to state-to-state relations. It's not only Armenia-Turkey relations. Number two, the consideration of history along with geopolitics. These two should be considered together. History, well, academically that's referred to as chronopolitics, along with geopolitics of the region. And number three, the Turkish school of thinking. I think this is a new development I have noticed. There is a school of thinking in Turkey that is constantly developing, and we need to consider that. And then finally, number four, diplomacy largely in discord with politics. And I will try to explain what I mean by this. Our diplomacy and our politics are not the same. They are in discord. So oftentimes they are in disagreement. And I will hopefully try to clarify what do I mean by diplomacy and what do I mean by politics. There's no doubt that we are in a new phase and experience in the Turkish-Armenian relations. In general, both sides aim and seem to be determined to press on and have repeatedly signaled rapprochement, reconciliation and agreement as their interest. Rapprochement is the interest expressed on both sides. This year, for example, if you consider only this year, 2014, after genocide remarks made by CNN, Reuters, New York Times, some Jewish papers, the BBC, The Economist, famous, well-known global and international papers and publications, and also consider this year the Senate Foreign Relations Committee resolution on the churches. And after these kinds of remarks, this year we've heard a condolence message. Everybody have heard that condolence message issued by Erdogan, and then Ahmet Davutoglu, the foreign minister, qualified the deportation of Armenians as wrong and inhuman. Well, of course, this is not new. These kinds of expressions are not new. The trend goes back to at least 2010, when just hours after the adoption of the Armenian Genocide Resolution in the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the United States, Turkish Foreign Minister, just hours after that resolution, Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu stated the Turkish intent, and this is a quote, "We are determined to press on and press ahead with normalization of relations with Armenia." There are similar kind of expressions on the Armenian side. So we have no shortage of similar statements from Armenia. So reconciliation, rapprochement, intent appears in these kinds of announcements, expressions in the last 4 or 5 years. But apart from these frequently heard and mutually reinforcing statements on both sides, we cannot, and I stress this carefully, we cannot easily assume that there's an established political relations between them. Diplomatic exchanges do not necessarily lead to political relations. This means, and I suggest a broader perspective, this means to me we need to go into a broader perspective which would depict politics as a multitude of influences, issues, and concerns such as history, genocide, diaspora, and even issues such as human trafficking, immigration, poverty, and transnational violence, all these issues deeply ingrained in the history of these countries. These kinds of issues and more similar issues will give us a broader perspective to look at. Because these issues extend beyond the existing and stated interests of these countries and intersect beyond their boundaries and control. So politics has a broader perspective and simply extends beyond diplomatic relations between Turkey and Armenia. And I make this statement because I think a broader perspective is important to understand the relations between Turkey and Armenia. Today, many Turkish intellectuals see reconciliation efforts with Armenia as a means to promoting Turkish democracy. It is a concept that we hear from Turkey, that there's a linkage between internal and external politics. So these intellectuals, and some of them are well known to Armenians, they see these reconciliation efforts with Armenia as means to promote democracy in their country. And through this, they try to eliminate authoritative imposition of social values and eliminating the deep state. That's a major crisis that they have in Turkey. So, see, Turkish intellectuals today aim democracy. Their aim is democracy. But I think it is an irony of history to consider Turkey as an emerging model of democracy in the Middle East, as these intellectuals do, and as many intellectuals in the West, especially in the United States, do, and often refer to. It's even more ironic. Turkey's international appearance as trustworthy broker in regional conflicts. Turkey today is making a major effort to intervene, moderate, and mediate between Israel and Palestinians. However, I think we should be able to see that this is an irony of history, that Turkey becomes an international trustworthy broker in those kinds of conflicts. Why? Because diversity is virtually non-existent in Turkish society, in Turkish culture, resulting in the deterioration and destruction of democracy. That democracy that the country has been claiming that they're nurturing for years. And we know for a fact, in our case, that hundreds of Armenian and Greek churches are permanently locked up, if not destroyed, only to indicate the fact that minorities are under perpetual siege. So deficiency in democracy points to the true intent and the true nature of Turkish foreign policy, which is a new hegemonic scheme, or some people call the new Ottomanism in the region, trying to invoke historical affinities in the region. It's not surprising to me that these expressions of cooperative relations with neighboring countries, and especially with Armenia, and reconciliation efforts are gridlocked by recurrent violations of liberal democratic principles in Turkey, and notably by refusing accommodation to legitimate demands of minorities in Turkey, and especially the Kurds. We have a lot of examples to point out that for years how the Kurds are being treated in Turkey. Many examples abound, especially in Kurdish situation. So the idea of democracy in Turkey suffers from an ethnocentric definition of citizenship and rejects the more inclusive understanding of ethnic, linguistic, religious, and cultural diversity. It certainly does not stimulate discussions for alternative political formations offering a more tolerant and more inclusive form of human society in which different groups, and especially deprived minorities, would be equally motivated to participate. It has already been, for example, a century since the Armenian genocide, and Turkish nationalism today has little to offer Armenia, the Armenian diaspora, and few remaining Armenians and other minorities in Turkey in terms of their safety and protection. There was an interview 2 days ago in one of the Turkish papers, interviewed Elif Shafak, is a familiar name for us, in which she talked about the Turkish society and how reinforced the statement that I just made. Turkish society is stubbornly patriarchal and homophobic. Sameness is venerated, diversity is not. It's interesting that she says that mainstream culture in Turkey is deeply suspicious of difference, be it cultural, ethnic, or sexual. This last point she made because, you know, recently, yesterday actually, in Turkey there was a protest by women against Deputy Prime Minister Bülent Arınç. You know, this guy made an announcement that women in Turkey should not laugh out loud in the public. Why? Because that would not protect their moral value. See, in order to protect their marriage, women should not be laughing. And then after that announcement, hundreds of women in Ankara and other cities came up protesting and laughing out loud in the public and posting their pictures as laughing women. And they say, laugh, so that the world will laugh with you. So what does this tell you? Identity is imposed from above. Identity in Turkey is imposed from above, and individuality is in serious danger. So going beyond these minor examples, I think we, as Armenians, we need to draw a comprehensive picture of the contemporary Turkish-Armenian situation. For the Armenian side, especially, we should realize that the state, the Armenian state alone, cannot dictate the fate of Turkish-Armenian relations. Not without considering the big picture of the Armenian nation, both in Armenia and in diaspora. We cannot ignore the trans-state and perpetual issues that fall beyond the scope of the state, because they have eventually causal effect on our recurrent political and social disorder in the country. So we simply cannot ignore those transnational issues, Armenia diaspora issues, and global social, economic, and political issues. So state-to-state relations will not explain much about Turkish-Armenian relations. has to be more broader perspective of understanding of the relations. So the big picture is the holistic image, including history, because history is very important for us. History is today for us. Armenians, for the most part, are a history people. Their history and traditions are dynamic and mutually contingent. History is not just something that happened in the past, but something perpetually in the making and in constant interpretation with the present diplomacy with Turkey. Ignoring this reality seems to disrupt the prospects of a balanced development course in Armenia. And that's a whole different issue of what do we mean by development of Armenia. If we take Armenian history side, for example, if we take Armenian diaspora as an example. It is an extraterritorial entity and has its politics. That politics is not detached from its history. It is not an easy task for the Armenian government to just start a new political phase or take a drastic and exclusively geostrategic turn in Armenian politics, detached from history, and then claim to have a diplomatic triumph. Past events, history through events, names, dates, is the main driving force, the main agent of political socialization for Armenians as well as diplomatic discourse. See, we get politically socialized, we become political entities because of those past events, names, dates, and examples that we learn. This is how we educate our kids about politics in schools, basically. So history for us is a political socialization factor, element. Okay, now the year 1988. I think the year 1988 was the year of great changes in the contemporary Armenian politics. It was a remarkable occasion to experiment state building that was presented to us, to Armenia, and fundamentally changed the political fate of Armenians. Great hopes and expectations and many national and organizational rethinking about what it meant to advance an Artsakh liberation struggle and how to pursue the idea of an independent state were all emerged beginning that year, 1988. It's not surprising, of course, if we pay attention to this carefully, the time period since 1988. Not surprisingly, the Turkish political mind did not sit idle and engage into both proximate and long-term policy responses to the reviving Armenian nationalism as they saw it. We see a very strong Turkish response and reaction to our political development since 1988. For example, about 15 very important and notable Turkish think tanks were very proactively engaged in contesting all claims of genocide and self-determination of Karabakh. So think tanks in Turkey became active. I think this thing called think tank in Turkey was an alien idea. In the last 20 years or so, we see like 15, now it's 20 new think tanks established in Turkey and also outside, in Europe and in Washington and the various different capital cities. And they have become very active and proactive against Armenian national awakening, they call. Other than those think tanks, another example is the intellectual investment that we witness in Turkey, and then a number of universities is a good indication. Turkey today has 180 universities. 95 of them were founded since 2006. You know, I listened to the speech given by President Abdullah Gül 2 years ago at Stanford when he was giving a commencement speech. he came up with these numbers. He mentioned these numbers. 2 years ago, he said there were 173 universities in Turkey. 89 were founded since 2006. Today, 2 years later, they have like 6 more already. And I've noticed that, I have to prove this further, that some of the money coming for these think tanks and universities are outside money, especially Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia is financing some of these universities. So from the Turkish perspective, diplomacy with Armenia seems to expand beyond bilateral relations and be explained and expound the foundation of the re-emerging Turkish role in the region. Stability in the region is explained through tacit Turkish objective of predominance, ranging from relations with Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Georgia, and oil-rich Caspian region, and Central Asian countries. To describe or depict this strategic moment, today's strategic moment in Turkish image, and renewed and show the new political image of Turkey. One of the professors that I've known, I met him here in the United States, who is teaching in Boğaziçi University, Kemal Kirişçi. He illustrated the change in Turkish foreign policy from his words, from Hobbesian culture of deep mistrust. Thomas Hobbes, you know, in international politics, says countries never never trust one another. So he says Turkey, from Hobbesian culture of deep mistrust of international system in the early 1990s, is moving towards Kantian, Immanuel Kantian culture of sharing common values and norms in the 21st century. See, here's a new image of Turkey. See, shared values, common norms, shared history. We keep hearing about these kinds of norms in Turkish politics. So this kind of intellectual framework that we hear from the Turkish universities about Turkish foreign policy, of course, was largely provided by Ahmet Davutoğlu, the foreign minister. In his words, Davutoğlu's words, and this is a quote, "It is impossible for a country experiencing constant crises with neighboring states to produce a regional and global foreign policy. A comprehensive peace plan and a package to develop economic and cultural relations have to be put into place simultaneously to overcome security crises with the closest neighbors." And he was addressing Armenia. Davutoğlu's proactive policies have been praised. This is the interesting part. His proactive policies have been praised globally for their strategic depth and importance in the region, and real political developments on the ground, and offered a comprehensive meaning to the Turkish role in the region. So I'm putting these out for you. So what's my point? The Turkish government, to me this is what I want to point out. The Turkish government in the last 20 years or so seems to be playing a new post-Soviet geostrategic role in the larger geopolitical considerations of South Caucasus, and gradually advancing and expanding its political norms. And more importantly, there seems to be global and also regional in the area, regional consensus around these diplomatic norms, which also address the Turkish political influence in the last 2 decades. Quite familiar by now is the repeated slogans, and I use the words interchangeably, repeated slogans like normalization of relations with Armenia and in the region, and also consolidation of security and increased Turkish influence by developing good neighborly and cooperative relations. These are mutually reinforced catchphrases, slogans, well thought and discussed in Turkish think tanks, universities, and government, well received and acknowledged globally as standards of behavior to initiate conflict resolution. An example of how globally these are very receptive Turkish political thinking in general. For example, we know Richard Falk. This guy, this professor from Princeton University, emeritus professor from Princeton University, was also an international human rights lawyer, and this has been very advocate of recognizing Armenian genocide. This guy has praised Davutoglu non-stop, constantly. He's publishing articles in Turkish papers, and praising Ahmet Davutoglu as a genius political mind ready to resolve conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere. For Richard Falk and his colleagues, Ahmet Davutoglu is a genius political mind. And we have to trust him in order to resolve conflicts in the Middle East and also in Caucasus, also with Armenians. Other than Richard Falk, for example, look at Woodrow Wilson's International Center for Scholars of the U.S. Smithsonian Institution. This institution has presented the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service to Davutoglu. After all, these slogans, catchphrases, has captured international attention, and so-called norms, they all indicate Turkey's regional policy devised to reintegrate Turkey into its immediate neighborhoods, and also can contribute to the expansion of the new Turkish post-Soviet imperial space. After considering all these broader perspectives and the broad general background information, more specifically, I think we should look at what we are facing in the immediate future. What's important to note for the immediate future? I think we will be dealing with Erdogan and his autocratic style as a key tool for the concentration of power in his hands. He's running for president, and a lot of articles about him, his style of campaigning and his slogans and expressions, they all indicate that he's more autocratic kind of leader, and when he wins the presidency, he's going to be centralizing power in his hands. And he has a very big chance to win. The elections are coming up next month. So his intention is also what? To change the Turkish constitution to create a stronger presidency, which will eventually amount to drift toward authoritarianism. Which means a stronger president with more executive powers and less checks and balances for a stronger new Turkey. Okay, near future also consider this. Next year, in 2015, Turkey will hold the presidency of G20. This group brings together the world's biggest economies. In fact, Turkish economy today is the 17th biggest economy in the world. The trade volume with Russia, staggering numbers. The trade volume with Russia is like $33 billion in 1 year. Last year, it was almost $33 billion trade relations with Russia. Russia is Turkey's second largest trade partner after European Union. Turkey ranks 8th among Russia's foreign trade partners. And I don't think Armenia has any influence in this. Armenian diplomacy, whatever we do, we have no influence in these Turkish-Russian relations. Russia still holds the predominant sway over the Transcaucasian region and manipulates the territorial wars in accordance with its own strategic objectives. The primary concern for Russia is extending its sphere of influence. Look at the sheer size of the country. the nuclear warheads, the large number of nuclear warheads, resource endowments, especially oil and natural gas. Look at this geography, its history, all ensure that it is still the dominant power in the South Caucasus. Given this, the geography of the region and the geopolitical factors, Russia and Armenia historically have had close relations. In fact, Armenia is Russia's near abroad, part of its traditional sphere of influence. And we're not going to be able to get rid of that. Of course, Armenia is also and primarily concerned about Turkey's continuing support to Azerbaijan and its growing military assistance to the country. Turkey has unwavering support for Azerbaijan regarding the Karabakh issue. It is unlikely that Armenia will achieve a significant breakthrough in border conflict with Turkey in the near future. Okay. The current nature of Turkish-Armenian bilateral relations can be traced, I think, to the two protocols that we've seen in 2009. And we can identify three important norms in those protocols. Many people argue that those protocols are dead. They're not ratified. Yeah, I agree. Those protocols are no longer in existence as approved or confirmed documents. But I think the logic of protocols continue and guide the behavior of bilateral relations. Tacitly, these protocol logics still exist. So what do we see in these protocols deriving and still used in Turkish foreign policy mind? Number one, confirmation of the existing borderline between Turkey and Armenia. Number two, evade any reference to the past and concentrate on the present. That is geopolitics, not history, not chronopolitics. Despite the fact that we keep hearing about this by Davutoglu and others, we hear the just memory, the term just memory about history. I don't think that terminology will serve Turkish interest anyway. It's for public consumption. And number three, we have respect, this norm that I identified as respect the territorial integrity of sovereign states. There has been a considerable international support to this diplomatic logic, to these norms, and no conflict of interest, I think, has seriously been explored. The Armenian authorities also seem to be departing from the same starting point and looking at the whole issue as a potential new opportunity for an improved socio-economic and political relations. Socio-economic priority prevails in Armenian political mind since 1991. After gaining independence, the country, Armenia, has quickly embraced market freedom and brought unprecedented prosperity for the few. It also widened inequalities of income and wealth and aggravated mass exodus from the country. So the liberation from controlled economy, after all, opened up the opportunity to privatize most of the industries. And it's still going on, privatization process. Rapid privatization of land began early in post-Soviet years, and farmers were quickly marginalized. And land ownership, large landowners leaving the countryside, by concentrating the wealth impoverished. I stress this because I think this is where we have to focus as our political strategy, political thinking. That's where our politics is, not in diplomacy. That's where our politics is. We should prioritize this over diplomacy. And I think there should be a clear demarcation of the boundary between economic growth and political values. So, until today, we see no attempt, no effort in the Armenian-Turkish diplomatic relations to be interpreted or understood as relief to the ordinary working people. Diplomacy has taken over and is likely to advance bilateral relations at best. And diplomacy has undermined the much-needed infrastructure and politics of socio-economic development. In other words, diplomacy ignored politics in Armenia. The important question at this point in my mind is not whether increased diplomatic relations with Turkey might lead to cooperative relations, established good neighborly relations, and order in the region, but whether ordinary people in Armenia will accept to live the consequences of these diplomatic actions. Diplomatic relations cannot defy the socio-economic logic of development. Interstate reconciliation might lead to and produce change and rapid transformation of the economy, such as increased trade, further privatization, and deregulation. It might also lead to normalization of relations, but cannot be allowed to advance at the expense of the society in the country. Diplomacy and economic growth, this is a realization we need to do first. Diplomacy and economic growth in Armenia should be consistent with the politics of development. Some of the demands of growth are, for example, privatization, government deregulation, and deep cuts in social spending. And fortunately, they're all extremely unpopular with citizens. We should be able to see that the suppression of human solidarity and democratic relations become the primary reasons to ignore the national interests and the interest of the collective, the wage-earning and peasant masses. The Turkish-Armenian relations should not be interpreted as an opportunity for economic growth, meaning expansion of lucrative business deals. Relations with Turkey, well, of course, might revive bilateral economic contacts, contribute to economic growth, but at the same time should also and carefully consider the vital development needs of the country or the socio-economic conditions of the people. In the final analysis, if you look at the Armenian situation today, or Armenian-Turkish situation today, look at Armenian situation in broad perspective. As a broad perspective, and looking at it as from a deep background. The Armenian political identity, for example, today, it has a long history going through significant changes, stages, from Sovietization to independence and sovereignty, state building, or attempts of state building today, and diaspora dispersion. As a nation, the Armenians have sure played an important role in transforming the international political environment from Cold War to post-Cold War to liberation of Artsakh to independence to state building, and today the perpetual concern most of us have as a result of current developments in bilateral relations with Turkey, beginning with the protocols in 2009 to football diplomacy, and then the gestures of condolences, just memory, and so forth and so on. You see this long trend, and then how this trend eventually shapes our political identity, political image. Of course, these are all diplomatic efforts that, to me, they all fail to advance any understanding of permanent state of security for Armenia, or socio-economic development policies, or safety and security of Karabakh, and many other pertinent issues such as trade relations, class conflict and poverty, and a whole range of national issues that do not fit into the continued logic and explanations of the current reconciliation diplomacy with Turkey. The Armenian authorities, after all, seem to be well experienced and concerned primarily with advancing diplomatic relations. See, we keep hearing about Sarkissian inviting the President of Turkey to come to Armenia. I've invited a couple of times, and vice versa. In my judgment, and then at ministerial level, the exchange is even more. Foreign ministers, they always get together. I think Armenian leadership is advancing pretty much in these diplomatic relations. But more important is to advance much faster in politics. And by that, I mean inward-looking decisions for state building, for institutionalization, for infrastructural development. And these areas are broad discussion topics, which to me, this is the real politics that we have ignored for long. Diplomacy is rarely challenged, and most dangerous diplomacy would be the effect of unchallenged decisions. So I think the critical mind, the critical Armenian mind proceeds on this suspicion. We need to investigate power relations and diplomatic discourses that try to establish a national identity alienated from politics. We need to investigate seriously these nuances. A critical mind also reveals some diplomacy politics contradictions. Our current diplomacy seems to matter more than our politics. In other words, politics and politics of state building, infrastructural development, institutionalization cannot be left to the mercy of diplomatic relations. Turkish-Armenian diplomatic attempts are important, of course, but they should not inscribe the fate of the Armenian state or the Armenian identity. We cannot ignore our politics for the sake of diplomatic gains. Of course, our political destiny is subject to the regional or great power diplomacy in the region and in the global level. And I think it is important after all to be highly active in this area. Prepare diplomats. I've heard that we have a school of diplomats in Armenia. Prepare diplomats. We need hundreds and hundreds of new diplomats to get involved in these IGOs, NGOs, and then those topics of positive sounding topics like negotiation, reconciliation, just memory. Well, Turks and Azeris are advancing in this propaganda war because they're more active in these international forums, IGOs and NGOs. So Armenia must become highly active in these organizations at the international level and try to counter Turkish and Azeri agenda. Well, that's diplomacy. That's good. However, more than diplomacy, my primary concern is our politics, which is in our hands. See, we have control, more control over politics than diplomacy. Our politics is in our hands, and we cannot afford to mishandle it because it is all about internal development. Okay, now look at this. For 2 decades, Armenia has undergone dramatic economic, political, and social transformations. For 2 decades since the independence. Economically, the country has shown steady growth. The civil society sector in Armenia began to develop after its independence, and a large number of groups were successful in mobilizing public support for various causes, such as environmental protection, human rights, women's rights, and humanitarian aid. These groups and their causes are testimony to the power and resilience of the Armenian youth in Armenia to face the challenges within the society and advance the process of democracy. This is what politics is. This is part of politics, serious politics, and I'm glad to see some activity in this respect in Armenia. What Armenian independence has reminded us is that state building is a founding political discourse that allows the country to establish its identity. Notably, perennial concepts, important concepts, key concepts of freedom and justice can spark political discourse and set the foundation of political institutionalization and infrastructural development in the country. Consequently, participation of all sectors of society in political process becomes the most certain element of development that is also capable of substituting injustice with justice among the people. And that's what I call politics. Of course, I'm not talking about the whole thing of politics. And this is clearly distinguishable and should be distinguished from diplomatic efforts, which goes on at the higher level, government level, global level, regional level. So what's my primary concern when trying to conclude? There's a Turkish intellectual vigor in the last 2 decades. So in this post-Soviet space, the Armenian political mind should realize the new Turkish hegemonic scheme. It is important to focus on the national survival strategic thinking, the inward-looking politics of building a state and developing it. For a small and landlocked country like Armenia, formulating a survival strategy necessitates a holistic view of security, a balanced adaptation to the changing demands of political and economic environment, and forward-looking vision. The country is under constant regional pressure to account for both threats and opportunities. All our neighbors are putting us under pressure. So survival strategy is a priority for us today, to design and devise a strategy, inward-looking development and political strategy. I think Armenia's future security largely depends on how the broader regional situation evolves. Moreover, I also think that Armenia's future security and balanced relations with the neighbors will be influenced largely by its political and socio-economic development. This would require major structural reforms to use the benefits derived from economic growth to eliminate poverty, improve educational, social, and health services, and reverse the trend of countries' diminishing population. Thank you.
Questions? Yes.